Hi, welcome aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall. Today we are going to walk through the procedures of running a hex crawl. If you play D&D or other popular role-playing games, you might have heard of hex crawls before. Hex crawls are a fun way to play the game. Generally, a hex crawl is used in a sandbox environment. It allows for a bit more open-ended style of exploration and play rather than a traditional narrative arc type game, which is what we see promoted a lot in modern products like the different campaign modules that Wizards of the Coast currently puts out. If you've seen my channel before, you've heard me talk about hex crawls all the time, but what we haven't done on this channel is actually go through the process of how a hex crawl is run at the table. So that's what we're going to do today. My hope is that you can see how the process works and how relatively simple it is to run as a game master, and hopefully you'll be interested in giving it a try in the future if you haven't already. So let's go ahead and get into running a hex crawl. Okay, so once you've decided to run a hex crawl, you need to choose your system of choice. Now, older versions of D&D have these hex crawl rules and procedures built into them. Modern D&D, not so much, but the good thing here is that they're easy enough to adopt the older rules to your preferred system of choice if you want to go with a more modern edition. Today, I'm going to be using Dolmenwood as our hex crawl example. Dolmenwood is a campaign setting turned game system after Wizards of the Coast's OGL debacle a couple of years ago. It was designed by Gavin Norman, the creator of Old School Essentials, the popular Basic Expert Retroclone. But essentially, Dolmenwood is 1981 Basic Expert D&D with just a few modifications and quality life improvements. Gavin does expand on the hex crawl rules laid out in BX, but the general process is essentially the same. So this is what we're going to use to walk through today. So let's go ahead and take a look at the process flow for running a hex crawl. One thing I really like about Necrotic Gnome's products is they do a really great job with their layout and making information super clear and easy to find. You'll see it as we kind of walk through this example. The first being the travel procedure per the day. So this is essentially your hex crawling rules, and it's laid out in these 6 steps. The first is checking the weather. So the referee determines the weather for the day, and then the players need to decide upon their course, their direction, which way they want to travel in the world, in the sandbox. Third, you as the DM have to check to see if they lose their direction. So the players can get lost when they're exploring. So you have to determine if they do that, and then there's a few steps on that. We'll go into a little bit deeper in a minute. Fourth, you need to check for wandering monsters. So this is your random encounter check for the day. Fifth, you as the game master have to describe their travel. So you'll make a bunch of rolls, you'll have all this information, and then you as the game master need to synthesize that information and relay it to the players. And you do this through your kind of narration style of choice. Lastly, once you've kind of gone through the description and they've done any actions that they want to take along their travel, you come to the end of the day, and then there's some kind of cleanup, both administratively and then some things for the players to do before you start the day anew and go through the cycle again. Now that we got the general high-level idea of the procedure down, we're going to get started on our hex crawling simulation. For this, so as I said, we're going to be using the Dolmenwood campaign setting, and we're going to have a couple of hexes that our fake party is going to be going through. For our example, our players are going to begin their day's travel at Castle Everdusk, and we can see that kind of on the right-hand side of this page. From there, they're going to be following the road, and they're going to go up through hex 409 and then up and to the left to hex 309. So the first step of our day for our procedure is to check for the weather. Now, in this case, Dolmenwood provides us these nice weather tables that we can roll on. I am going to say that it's autumn because at the time of recording this video, it is autumn. So we're going to go ahead and roll 2d6 to see what the weather is for our players' travel. So I'm rolling now, and I got an 11. So there's a frosty chill in the air. Okay, so it's a bit cooler maybe than it would normally be in autumn, but that's something the players are going to have to deal with. Next step is to determine the direction, or the players would tell you their course of travel. I've already told you that they're going to follow the road and they're going to go 2 hexes. So they're going to go to hex 409 and then they're going to head over to hex 309. Next, we need to check if the players are going to get lost in their travels during the day. In this case, because our players are following a road, they cannot actually get lost. So in our example, we wouldn't have to roll for it. But if they weren't on a road, that's where you'd roll for it. In this case, I'll just walk through. So if you rolled and then it did come up that they had lost their direction, then you'd want to determine what happens from there. In most systems, it's generally going to be determining where did they veer off course. They had an intended direction, but did they go to the left? Did they go to the right? Did they fully circle back? You'd have to kind of figure that out. In the Dolmenwood books here, we can see on the left, there's a table for consequences getting lost, and you can roll on those tables. It also talks a little bit about how you can choose to handle the players getting lost. You can either keep the fact that they've been lost a secret until they realize they are not where they were intending to go, or you can openly tell the players, hey, you got lost along your travel for the way, and you can let them map in that direction. I think this is a discussion for you to have with your individual table, probably before you get into playing the game. Some really might enjoy the idea of getting lost and having no idea where they are, and others might really be frustrated by that and would kind of rather gamify it a bit and just, oh, we got lost, but now we know which hexes we're actually in, and then they, can try to course correct from there. Personally, I kind of like the idea of keeping it secret, but if you want to do it the open style, it's your table and there's no wrong way to play. Next, we need to make our rolls for determining if there is a random encounter for the day. In most systems, the random encounter is going to be a 1 in 6 chance, but Dolmenwood is a little bit different. They actually vary the encounter chance by the terrain or the region you are in the campaign map. In this case, we are looking at a 2 in 6 chance of having a random encounter. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to say, let's roll up a random encounter. Say we roll the die, we hit a 1 or 2 on it, and now we have this random encounter that's going to take place at some point during the party's travel. So let's go ahead and switch over to our encounter tables to see what we can find out. Okay, so as you can see, in this case, Dolmenwood provides us with the encounter types. We can roll from there. So we've determined that there's going to be an encounter. Next, we need to roll up what type of encounter it is here. And you can see that we have these options here. So in this case, it's going to be a daytime encounter, and our players are on a road or a track. So we're going to roll the D8 and we're going to reference that column. So rolling now, we got a 2, so it's a monster on the track. From there, we are going to check out our common encounters section here, and there's the monster section here. So we're going to roll a D20. So I got a 4. So in this case, it's going to be ghouls. Okay, ghouls. In this case, we have 2d4 ghouls. So rolling, we got a 3 total. So 3 ghouls the players will encounter along the road. Now from here, because we have the encounter, we can make a lot of extra rolls to really give us the information that we need to run the encounter. I like the idea of having some sort of activity or context for what is happening with the encounter. In this case, Dolmenwood gives us a creature activity table in the bottom left of this spread here. So let's go ahead and roll on that to see what we get. So rolling a d20. You got a 14, so they're negotiating with something. So in this case, there is a question mark, so we need to roll up another encounter to determine a second creature that's involved. So this is kind of fun. Let's go ahead and see what we got. They are negotiating with a mortal, so we're going to roll on the mortal table. So we got an 11, which is a magician. That's interesting. We could roll for the number of magicians, but I think maybe it'd be interesting to just have one in this case. We don't need to add a ton here. One magician and 3 ghouls. So maybe this is some sort of necromancer that's actually bargaining with these ghouls or trying to bind them to its service. That's very interesting, and adds a little bit more context to these ghouls, because when we first roll ghouls, I immediately thought, okay, now we have the scenario where these mindless monsters are going to attack the PCs. We don't really need to roll their reaction or anything like that. But just this simple activity totally changes the frame of what could be potentially happening. And maybe the players will actually interact with the magician and not the ghouls. So I am going to go ahead and roll a reaction roll in this case, because there's this necromancer type that the players might have to deal with. So rolling a reaction, I got a 5. A 5 is hostile, may attack. Okay, so there's this necromancer. It's got some ghouls. Maybe he is going to attack the party. From there, why don't we check for surprise? So generally, on a 1 or 2, a side is surprised in the encounter. So we'll roll for the party first. Are they going to be surprised at some point? Nope, they got a 3. What about the necromancer and his ghouls? Nope, also a 3. So they're not going to, neither side is going to be surprised, and they're going to both be able to react at the same time if they want to do so. Lastly, we want to check for the encounter distance. So let's go ahead and roll up that so we can see here down in the, again, in the bottom left, if it is an outdoor encounter, the distance is going to be 2d6 times 30 feet. So rolling 2d6 here. Okay, I got 9 times 30 is 270 feet away. So that's pretty far away where they'll spot each other. It might be a clearing or a kind of a straight part on the road. All right, so if I were the game master and I rolled all that up, I'd make notes of it for now. And then once I kind of look at the rest of the travel for the day, we'll figure out where to slot that encounter in a way that will make sense. You as the game master have a little bit of freedom and leeway here on when you want to put that into your day's travel. So you could look at what's going to come up in the different hexes and find a spot that might make sense to introduce this encounter. Now, the one thing I would say here is that you might want to do it before they get to a point of interest, because if they delve into a point of interest, then that might take the rest of your game session, and then this random encounter might be forgot or go by the wayside. That's totally okay if that's how you want to do it or how you want to play it out. But if you want to kind of get these encounters involved, do it before you might get to a point where your game session could go into a different mode. So that would be my suggestion. From here, we have all our details from the rolls we made. It's time to narrate the party's travel. We're going to want to give some description of their travel through the hexes, and we need to call out the points of interest that they see along the way. In our case, in traveling through these 3 hexes that we have in our key, we have 2 main points of interest that we're going to highlight. The 2 points of interest is going to be one in hex 409, which is the hamlet of Gallblight First. So you're going to want to add some context about what they see here. The really nice thing about this published product is that it gives some pretty detailed information about the hex key. So there's even a little bit of like flavor up here. You know, you can talk about how as they get close to the village, they catch scents of onions and garlic. So it's a small farming village. You can narrate what they see. So there's the small inn, there's an old toll house, there's a barracks. You know, you can give some detail about what's happening in this hamlet. And your players might want to check out what's happening there. They're likely going to ask you questions. So you just provide your information in that sort of back and forth exchange manner like you would in any dungeon or adventure style quest. It's essentially the same kind of mode of relaying information and taking in what the players want to do and reacting to what they want to do. From this hex, the party will continue on the road to hex 309. What I really like about Dolmenwood and the PDFs is that these maps are hyperlinks. So the hexes around it, you can click on it and it'll jump you to that page, which is really nice because they're not necessarily right next to each other, but you can hop easily to one another as your players kind of travel across the map. So again, here we have some text there, but the main point of interest here is going to be the ramshackle tower. They're going to see this tower. It says it's up on this bald hill overlooking the road. So they're definitely going to see the tower as they're traveling. If your party takes interest in the tower, then you can play it like a dungeon adventure if they have their eyes on kind of sneaking in or pillaging it. From there, you'd go ahead and switch over to your dungeon crawling rules and navigate play in that mode. But you could also just run it as a simple social encounter if they just want to go up to the tower and see who lives there and why, or what they're up to. You know, it could be a mage, it could be a warrior. They don't really know until they go up there and find out. And then maybe they can interact with them and maybe they get some quest out of it, or hook, or further information about the area. So it's really kind of just organically telling the story of what the players are doing as they travel across your map. Now, the last element we would consider in this travel of play is, of course, our random encounter. When are we going to call that in? We rolled it up in the beginning, so we know we have that encounter with the magician and his ghoul. You have some leeway on when that could occur, which hex, and what makes sense within the narration. In my case, and looking at this, I would probably put it after the hamlet, but before the tower. I would say maybe if the players check out the hamlet, maybe they get some sort of hook about there's this necromancer causing them trouble, and if they could take care of him, the hamlet would be really grateful. Maybe they're offering some sort of reward or something like that, or have some information they could share with the party, and then you could play it that way. Alternatively, if they just ignore the hamlet and go on the road, you could just have the magician and his ghouls occur, and then the players can react accordingly to it. They could sneak around him and have nothing to do with him. They could attack him. They could try to parlay. We know he's going to be a little bit hostile based on the reaction roll, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to attack. It said may attack. So it could kind of depend on how the players role play out that social encounter. But I think the tower presents a lot of interesting adventuring opportunity. So if you don't call your random encounter before the tower, you run that risk of them spending the whole session with the tower. And then in that case, your random encounter is kind of lost until you pick up play the next time, or it just might be lost for good. Again, not a problem, but if you want to kind of play it by the procedural book, then that's where I would call it in. So from there, you just conclude the adventure day. The party would need to camp if they're out in the wild, or if they end up in civilization, they can rest at an inn. And then you just update your records to reflect the time spent. So one day, move the calendar forward. The party marks off any items they use, like rations or any other consumables. And then the party can regain their hit points and spells per your game rules. And then you just start the next day and you go through the cycle again. So that's it. That's a walkthrough of how you run a hex crawl. It's quite procedural, which I think is really nice. Using the checklist style can really help you structure your game and the exploration. You can be consistent in your rulings around traveling around the sandbox, and that just makes your life a lot simpler when you have sort of this checklist style rules to apply. Hopefully that helps you see what it's like to run a hex crawl if you've never thought of it before. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. It really does help the channel out a lot. Consider checking out my monthly newsletter, Enchanted Nimbus. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you in the next one.